Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Okay, I'll start. Na po, I'm back.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
I'm here.
Okay. So good evening from Mexico City. Good morning, good afternoon to all of our participants from all over the world, and welcome to the second episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas, Mexico 2025. Before we begin, I'd like to lay out some gentle house rules and reminders. We would like to kindly request that the video cameras and microphones of all participants in Zoom be disabled throughout the program and presentation. After our speaker's presentation, we will have an open forum wherein everyone is encouraged to ask questions or provide their comments. Participants may also state or write their questions in the chat box here in Zoom or in YouTube. Participants are also invited to fill out the evaluation form, which will be shared at the end of the session. With that said, I'd like to call on Her Excellency Lilibeth R. Diapera, Ambassador of the Philippines to Mexico, to deliver the welcome remarks. Ma'am?
Good evening, buenas tardes. To all our participants from various offices and universities in the Philippines and Mexico, members of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues from other Philippine Foreign Service posts, Philippine honorary consuls, members of the Filipino communities under our jurisdiction, those who are joining us via our YouTube channel, friends, and my colleagues at the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, good evening, good morning, and welcome to the second episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas, Mexico 2025. On behalf of the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, allow me to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished guest speaker for the second episode of La Historia Olvidada Filipinas, Mexico 2025, Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas Izquierdo, advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. He will talk on the Novo Hispanic who negotiated with the Shogun. I would also like to extend my appreciation to our partners for the virtual colloquium series, especially to Dr. Tomas Calvillo of El Colegio de San Luis for providing us with a resource speaker for tonight's episode. To our participants who are joining us for the first time tonight, this initiative with the University of the Philippines Diliman, El Colegio de San Luis, and the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program based on the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico started in October 2023 with the aim to highlight pivotal events and contexts that have shaped the engagements between the Philippines and Mexico, spanning from the 16th century to the contemporary period. Likewise, to elevate scholarly, diplomatic, and cultural exchanges between the Philippines and Mexico, and to understand the role of the Manila-Acapulco galleons in shaping relations and pioneering global trade. In the first episode last month with Dr. Nenita P. Domingo as resource speaker, we learned about the various objects from the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade that influenced the Philippines and Mexico. Dr. Domingo emphasized that goods were not only traded through the Manila galleon, humans were treated as merchandise, and the galleon trade was a slave route. She presented that seafarers who deserted the Manila galleon and the Chinos who were domestic servants and slaves had an impact on Mexican ancestry and society. For tonight's episode, we will be learning about Rodrigo de Vivero, the Novo Hispano who negotiated with the Shogun. He was sent to Manila in 1608 as interim governor. Let us all listen attentively to the presentation of Ambassador Ruiz Cabañas to know more about the topic. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. And muchas gracias a todos. Mabuhay.
Thank you very
ma'am.
much. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you
Ah,
very much, Ambassador. Yes, Ambassador Ruiz, just a few more moments. I'd like to call on Mr. Ralph G. Roldan, the first Secretary and Consul of the Philippine Embassy to Mexico, to introduce our mystery resource person for tonight's session. Sir?
Well, soon he will not be a mystery because I'm gonna be introducing him to all of us here. Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas Izquierdo is a career ambassador from the Mexican Foreign Service since 1998. He has a bachelor's degree in foreign relations from Colegio de Mexico and master's degree in political science from the University of Columbia. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he served as Director for the United Nations, Assessor as Chief for the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, Special Affairs Coordinator, and General Director for North America. He was Undersecretary of Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights from 2015 to 2016 overseas. He was attached to the Mexican Permanent Mission to the United Nations and to the Embassy of Mexico in Washington. With Ambassador Charge, he was permanent representative of Mexico to the Organization of American States, Ambassador of Mexico to Japan, and Ambassador of Mexico to Italy, concurrent to Albania, Malta, and San Marino. He also performed as permanent representative of Mexico to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, World Food Program, and the International Fund of Agricultural Development from 2011 to 2015. In 2019, he was the assessor of FAO's General Director. He has been professor at the Universidad Iberoamericana, ITAM, and Colegio de Defensa Nacional. Currently, he's professor of foreign politics of Mexico and international bodies at Tecnológico de Monterrey. He has published several articles on specialized magazines or chapters on books about Mexican foreign politics, Mexico-U.S. relations, human security, and United Nations, the Organization of American States, the relations between Mexico and Japan, and the 2023 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Objectives. In the last 3 years, he published 3 books about those topics. He writes weekly on Diplomacia and Desarrollo Sostenible column for the El Heraldo de México since 2020. He had been condecorated by the governments of Japan and Italy and received special acknowledgments from the Mexican Foreign Service and the Organization of American States. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas. Ambassador, you may now take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roldan, for your very kind words addressed to me, as well as Ambassador de Apira for her very kind invitation to talk to you this evening. I also express my gratitude to the Colegio de San Luis, and especially Dr. Tomás Calvillo, for having connected us, myself with the Philippine Embassy in Mexico to really share 1 hour, 1 hour and a half talking about the historical links between Philippines and Mexico. I will focus my presentation on this almost forgotten figure of Rodrigo de Vivero y Averruza, who was a very, very able Novo Hispano. That means, he was a criollo born in Mexico, but he was at the time obviously part of the Spanish Empire. And so he, as I will try to explain to you, he was a very distinguished person, and he made a lot of contributions to New Spain as well as to the Spanish Empire. As you know, let me put this as a general framework for this talk. Philippines and Mexico were united by the galleons that traveled from Acapulco to Manila and back to Acapulco since 1565 till 19th century, at the time of Mexico's fight for independence of Spain. In 1565, Andrés de Urdaneta discovered the maritime route that made possible what was called the tornaviaje, el viaje de retorno, the tornaviaje between Manila and Acapulco, crossing the Pacific Ocean. In Japan, they call this the Kurabicho Sea Current, which is a sea current that crosses the Pacific Ocean, in the northern part of the hemisphere. That was an old objective of the Spanish Empire that had initiated since 1527, after Hernán Cortés sent 2 vessels to cross the immense Pacific Ocean. But, those attempts failed because it was really very difficult to make that tornaviaje because of the winds and sea currents in the Pacific Ocean. The tornaviaje, discovered by Andrés de Urdaneta, made possible and especially made profitable the permanent establishment of the Spanish in Manila. There was mostly, and I want to emphasize this, those Spanish in Manila, they were mostly criollos, and mestizos born in Mexico, no, then New Spain. 250 years of maritime trade from 1565 to 1815 between Manila and Acapulco produced immense economic, social, and cultural ties and mutual influences, not only between Philippines and Mexico, then New Spain, but among Asian nations that included China, Japan, Siam, today Thailand, and India, and the Spanish Empire possessions in Europe, and America. The Galeon Acapulco Manila represented, in my view, the first true globalization of trade. This guy, on the left side is Andres de Urdaneta. He was a Basque, born in the northern part of Spain. He was a sailor, but he was also a priest, and he was a very wise man. So he discovered how to make this, tornaviaje from Manila to Acapulco. And he discovered that if you sail from Manila towards the Japanese coastline, you can make and reach this Curabicho Sea Current and arrive eventually in America, not quite in Mexico, or not actual Mexico, but coastline of California, and then you could go from there to Acapulco, traveling the coastline of Mexico. Who was Rodrigo de Vivero? Rodrigo Vivero was a very special guy. He was born in Mexico in 1564. Nobody really knows today whether he was born in Mexico City or in Tecamachalco, a small town in Puebla State. But he was born either in Mexico City or in Tecamachalco, where his family had a very, very big possession. He was born within a noble family with direct links to the viceroy Luis de Velasco. His father received from Hernán Cortés, the conqueror of Mexico, the Tecamachalco encomienda. That was the way they called this huge, huge geographical areas awarded or given to a distinguished Spaniard because of his high position in the New Spain society. That encomienda was one of the bigger and richer in New Spain. He had a very distinguished career. His father sent him to the king's court in Madrid when he was 10 years old to be a page of Queen Anna. After that, he was soldier in Portugal and Flanders campaigns under Duque de Alba command, the famous Duque de Alba. Then he returned to Mexico and he was appointed as commander of San Juan de Ulua fort to defend Veracruz port against English and Dutch pirates. All Mexicans know, the San Juan de Ulua fort. It's a very, like a medieval fort in Veracruz, and it is, part of the Mexican history for the last, 500 years. He then was appointed administrator of Tasco mines. At the time, the minas de Tasco, they were the backbone of New Spain economy. All the silver came out from Tasco, mainly, and other possessions in Mexico, but mainly from Tasco mines. Then he was appointed by Viceroy Luis de Velasco, governor of New Vizcaya province, which is the northern part of Mexico. That was in Mexico today. That covers the states of Durango, Nayarit, Sinaloa, and at that time they were really areas which were not really governed by New Spain. There he confronted the Chichimecas, and very independent and rebellious Indian tribe. Viceroy Luis de Velasco sent him to Manila in 1608 as interim governor because his predecessor, Pedro de Acuña, apparently had been murdered. Unfortunately, there is not one single portrait of Rodrigo de Velasco. And this is a pity because you can see in this image three very important Spanish envoys in Manila of the 16th and 17th centuries. On the left side, you have Miguel López de Legazpi, the first Spanish governor of the Philippines. Then at the center, you have this guy, Pedro de Acuña, the guy that apparently was murdered. And then that provoked that Rodrigo was sent to Manila to really cover the void and try to reestablish order in Manila. And on the right side, you have Juan de Avila, the successor of Rodrigo de Vivero. But keep in mind that Rodrigo was never appointed a permanent uh, uh, governor in Manila. He was only an interim governor who had a mandate to reestablish order in Manila. Just to give some images of those ages. On the left side, you have here a portrait of Hernán Cortés, very well known in Mexico and Philippines, I guess, and in Latin America and Spain. He was, the conqueror of Mexico. And on the right side, you have Luis de Velasco. He was not so well known. He was the second viceroy of Mexico of New Spain, and he was part of a very noble family in Spain, and he had all the trust of the King of Spain. Just to give you an impression, because this is not really an image, it's just an impression, geographical impression of what the Condado del Valle de Orizaba really meant. It was one of the biggest encomiendas in New Spain. This is a map drafted in the 16th or 17th centuries. And as you can see, there are many towns within this Condado del Valle de Orizaba. It was one of the largest and most rich condados in New Spain. And that was given to Rodrigo de Vivero as a reward for his services to the Spanish crown. When Rodrigo de Vivero arrived in Manila in 1608, he initiated direct contacts with the Japanese shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, to negotiate peace agreements because Japanese population in Manila had been revolting and involved in piracy activities. So through letters, exchanging letters, he explained to the shogun that he had to impose order in Manila, and that really implied that some Japanese would be put in jail and some of them would be freed. But this was his first exercise, making diplomacy with the Japanese shogun. It is important to say and to really to stress that there was mutual distrust and fear between Japanese officials or Japanese empire and the Spanish empire in the Philippines. Why? Why was this situation of distrust and fear? On the one hand, the Japanese distrusted the Spanish, because they felt that such a big empire that was able to be in three continents at the same time had to be a very powerful empire. So the Japanese were very, very fearful of this Spanish power. On the other hand, the Spanish in Manila were very fearful of the Japanese capabilities at the area. They knew that the Japanese had the ability to make war, to make revolt in Manila and in the Philippines geographical area. So they really had to behave towards the Japanese. So it was a situation of distrust and fear, and trying to, if possible, to promote cooperation between the two empires. After 1 year, Rodrigo de Vivero left Manila in July 1609. It was a late date to leave Manila because of the typhoons. The typhoon seasons started at that time in July, August, so it was a late date for him to leave Manila. But he left because his successor, Juan de Silva, had arrived in the Philippines. His galleon, called the San Francisco, shipwrecked on September 30, 1609, in front of a small fisheries Japanese town, Otaki, near Edo. You know, the Edo today is the capital city of Japan, Tokyo. And so, miraculously, I would say, the Japanese divers called amas, they were women, very, very able women. No, they were pearl seekers. They saved 317 Novo Hispanos out of 377. So these women saved most of the Novo Hispanos that were traveling in the San Francisco ship. So they really nourished them. And 3 weeks later, Rodrigo de Vivero was taken to Edo to meet with the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. He spent 11 months traveling throughout Japan with the permission of the shogun. He had, he was very interested in making contact with the religious Catholic, either Franciscan or Jesuits missions in Japan. There were a little few of them. So he made contact with them, and so he realized that he was very interested in promoting Christianism and especially Catholicism in Japan. The amazing thing is that without any formal authority, and this is really very significant, Rodrigo de Vivero started to negotiate with the shogun on several agreements. He called these agreements the capitulations, las capitulaciones. And then, after negotiating with the shogun, throughout several weeks, he left Japan on August the 1st, 1610, 11 months late, after he had shipwrecked in the San Francisco, and he left Japan in a ship called San Buenaventura. He baptized this galleon San Buenaventura precisely, as an expression of a wish that he would have a Buenaventura returning to New Spain. The thing is that this galleon was built by William Adams, an English sailor who had shipwrecked himself years before and had stayed in Japan as an advisor to the shogun. Yeah, I mean, to summarize, among those capitulations, those agreements between Rodrigo de Vivero and the shogun, I mean, you had this. One, freedom of preaching for Spanish, especially Franciscan priests in Japan. Two, eviction, expulsion of the Dutch sailors and traders from Japan. Third, opening of Japanese ports to Spanish ships and traders. And fourth, establishment of a Spanish naval base in Edo. Those were, the capitulations. Where do you find these capitulations? In the book that was written by Rodrigo de Vivero, that was called Relación del Japón. We will talk later about this very, very important book. But most significant among the agreements, among these capitulations, was the agreement of establishing diplomatic relations between the Japanese and the Spanish empires. That meant that there would be direct connections, naval, diplomatic, economic, cultural relations between Japan and New Spain. Not so much with Madrid. Madrid was very far, but Mexico City, was the capital of New Spain. His proposal, however, was not adopted by the Madrid government because it was opposed by two by two, opposers. One, they were the Manila traders, who felt that they could be displaced by the opening of direct maritime links between Japan and New Spain. Second, some of the king advisors also feared that Japanese could take advantage of the Spanish learning how to build galleons. This was something like of a technology transfer. They feared that the Japanese were very adamant of learning Western Spanish technology on how to build these galleons. But the Madrid court also rejected Vivero's plans, and this is very important to me because the establishment of direct links between Japan and New Spain was considered politically very risky. I mean, for the Spanish crown, because it was conducive to New Spain's independence. After not convincing the court, Rodrigo de Vivero returned to his Tecamachalco encomienda in Puebla, in New Spain. After several years, he was appointed governor of Panama province, the same Panama, the Strait of Panama, considered a strategic position because all the gold and silver coming from the Virreinato del Peru crossed through Panama and then make the trip to Spain. He was appointed in 1620 and he lasted in Panama for 8 years, covering the interests of the crown. Just to present to you two images. On the left side, you have Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu is an extremely important figure in the history of Japan because he was the first member of the Tokugawa family that they were the architects of the Japanese unification of the same rule. So Tokugawa Ieyasu is the architect of the Japanese unity in the 17th century. On the right side, you have William Adams. This was the English sailor that had worked for the Dutch Navy, and he was the guy that built the San Buenaventura ship, where the Rodrigo de Vivero and his 300 members of his ship, they traveled from Japan to New Spain. After having spent 8 years in Panama, Rodrigo returned to his encomienda in Tecamachalco, Puebla, in 1629, and he established the first sugar mill in New Spain that was located in Orizaba, Veracruz. King Felipe III named him the first Conde del Valle de Orizaba, an immense area even bigger than his old encomienda. It was really a reward for his services to the Spanish crown. Rodrigo de Vivero died in Orizaba, Veracruz in 1636 at age 72. He was buried at the Tecamachalco Franciscan Monastery. He was buried there because he asked to be buried there. And he was so influential in the New Spain society that whatever he wished, it was complied with, by either the monastery or the government. How do you assess Rodrigo de Vivero? I would say he was a member of the Spanish nobility. In that sense, he was a very, very Spanish man. But, and this is something very, very, very important, he resented the different treatment he received by the crown for not being a peninsular, a Spanish born in Spain, but an Indiano, a Spanish born in New Spain. He knew that was a very important difference at his time. That meant that he was never appointed to the most important positions in the Virreinato. He was never appointed viceroy or member of the Real Audiencia. I believe he was a man of exceptional gifts and experiences that gave him a profound vision not only of New Spain, but of the Spanish Empire as a whole, and to develop a global vision. He was a soldier. I mean, don't forget he fought wars in Europe, in Mexico, New Spain, or against the Japanese in Manila. He was a public administrator. He administrated the Taxco mines. He administrated, several other positions within the New Spain government. He was a governor, not only an interim governor in Manila, but he was a governor of a huge part of New Spain, called New Vizcaya. And very, very important, he was a writer. He used to reflect on his experiences and he wrote on them. He wrote he had used two arms during his life, the sword and the pen. So he was a very, very special guy. I would say that today we know who was Rodrigo de Vivero because he wrote several books, including one of his dealings and negotiations with Tokugawa Ieyasu, called the Relación del Japón. When you read his writings, no, immediately emerges the image of a nobleman, no, a true cavalier, that was profoundly loyal to the Spanish king, but at the same time that he was resented with him and the Madrid court. He criticizes the king directly for appointing cortesanos de Madrid, members of the court, in the most important positions in New Spain, and not to the sons of those who had conquered the land, New Spain. I mean, he was part of those sons of those who had conquered the land. He complained with the king about the tremendous abuses that many Spanish were inflicted to the indigenous population. He was a witness of the dramatic fall of Indian population. Without the Indians, there are no Indians, he wrote. That meaning no future. He even proposed to bring negros, I'm sorry to say, but the history records that word, the negros from Africa, because the Indians, according to his criteria, were too weak to labor in the mines. He didn't realize that they were, victims of the diseases and epidemics that were brought from Europe to America. He was a man of action, yes, certainly, but he was also a man of reflection, with a strategic mind who had developed a very realistic vision of the complicated geopolitics of his age. He was also a profoundly religious person. He considered that the main historical mission of the Spanish Empire was to expand Christianism, Catholicism in America and in Asia. He was against the Protestant reform. He was a soldier of the counter-reform and especially close to the Franciscans. Here you have, this is the book Rodrigo de Vivero, Relación del Japón. You can find it today, in the internet. You can get it, and it's really a very interesting book. On the right side, you can have and you can read the Testamento, the last will of Rodrigo de Vivero, where he reestablishes his faith, all that he was proud of, and all the inheritance of his belongings. Rodrigo Vivero plan was to plan to establish formal trade, maritime, and diplomatic relations between New Spain and Japan was never seriously considered by the Madrid court, for the reasons I already explained. Instead, Viceroy Luis de Velasco sent to Japan another famous explorer, Spanish explorer, Sebastián Vizcaíno, to express gratitude to the Shogun for the assistance provided to Rodrigo de Vivero. But in fact, it was a mission to secretly explore northern Japan without telling that to the shogun or the Japanese. The Japanese found out about it, and that produced deep distrust towards the Spanish. Meanwhile, a feudal lord from Sendai, Date Masamune, sent Hasekura Tsunenaga to New Spain, Spain, and Rome to formally ask the viceroy, the king, and the pope to send hundreds of Franciscan monks to Japan. At that time, you can say Japan was really divided on those who were willing to receive the Christians, the Catholics, especially the Franciscans, and those really opposed to that because they were afraid, after the religious conquest, I mean, there would be a really political uh, political and domination from the Western powers in Japan. He failed, Rodrigo de Vivero, because, I'm sorry, no, not Rodrigo de Vivero, Hasekura Tsunenaga, he failed because when he arrived in Rome, news had arrived at the same time from Japan that the shogun was persecuting and expelling the Spanish and Portuguese monks. Soon thereafter, the shogun decided to expel from Japan all foreigners, especially the Portuguese and the Spanish, because of their insistence in expanding Catholicism in Japan. Instead, the shogun allowed the Dutch to open a trade facility in Nagasaki. The Dutch, in my view, were the clear winners of this competition among European kingdoms on entering, trading, and influence Japan. Japan remained as isolated all the years that the shogunate lasted, until 1854, when the U.S. Commodore Matthew C. Perry forced them to reopen the country to trade and diplomatic relations with Western nations. Commodore Perry was well known in Mexico. He had commanded the occupation of Veracruz port in 1847 when the U.S. invaded Mexico. Perry, in my view, was an expert in invading foreign countries at the time when the US government decided to initiate a competition with the British Empire for the hegemony in the Pacific area. The Manila-Acapulco galleon was suspended in 1815 by the Spanish crown. As a result of the Mexican War of Independence, it was chaotic, and because of poor economic conditions in New Spain, as well as in Spain, by the way. In Mexico, you can find multiple examples of the economic, social, cultural ties with the Philippines and other Asian countries, directed, products really closely related to this trans-Pacific trade. Let me show you some images of the China Poblana, the most Mexican folklore figure that actually was a princess from India. In Mexico, we still call the mango de Manila, the famous mangoes, the Philippine fruit, is still called the same way in Mexico today, mango de Manila, just to highlight how important, the quality and the very important species being a mango de Manila. There is a fence that surrounds the organ, in the Catholic Cathedral in Mexico City. That fence was not made in New Spain, not made in Spain or in Europe. That fence was made in China in 1715. What does that imply? Well, it implies that China was already a very important trade power in the 18th century. For the New Spain, it was cheaper and probably most efficient to buy things from China than to bring them from Europe. If that sounds familiar, well, it is familiar because history sometimes repeats itself. Let me show you these pictures of the China poblana. On the left side, you have a beautiful China poblana. But, I mean, you will never, if you don't know it, that the arrangement, the robes, were in part taken from this famous Indian princess, Indian princess that arrived in New Spain and landed in Puebla in Mexico, La China Poblana. On the right side, you have the really great organ in Mexico City Cathedral. But what you don't know, but it's important to realize, is that the fence that surrounds the organ was built in China. Let me show you this this image. On the left, you have the San Franciscan Monastery in Tecamachalco, the place where Rodrigo de Vivero was probably baptized, and the place that he was buried. He was buried under the main altar of the church within this San Francisco Covenant in Tecamachalco, Puebla. You can visit this fantastic Franciscan Covenant in Tecamachalco. On the right side, there is a building very well in Mexico. We all know this Casa de los Azulejos. It was not built by Rodrigo de Vivero himself. It really was built by his granddaughter. And his granddaughter ordered the construction of this Casa de los Azulejos, which is still, today in Mexico City. It's one of the most famous buildings in Mexico City. But it was really the house of the Marqués del Valle de Orizaba, or del Conde del Valle de Orizaba, after Rodrigo de Vivero and his descendants. Rodrigo de Vivero, his biography has not been written yet. If anyone here in this encounter is willing to do it, I will encourage his or her to really try to make a research on Rodrigo de Vivero. He was a criollo with deep loyalty to the Spanish crown, but convinced that the Madrid court discriminated to the Spanish born in Indias, New Spain, like himself. Mexican historian Fernando Benitez considered that Vivero's generation was the first generation of true Mexicans because they developed a conscience that they belonged to the Indias, not to the Spanish peninsula, and that their respective interests were not always the same. His Relación del Japón was published in Mexico in 1855. It was read by historians, and intellectuals, such as Francisco Díaz Covarrubias. Who was Francisco Díaz Covarrubias? Well, he was an astronomer. He was a scientist. He headed a scientific group of Mexican astronomers that visited Japan in 1874. After their visit to Japan, he recommended the establishment of diplomatic relations with that country. Formal diplomatic relations between Japan and Mexico initiated in 1888. Mexican ties, very unfortunately, almost disappeared as a result of the end of the galleon trips, as well as the Philippines annexation to the US in 1898. Let me give you, my view for the future as a conclusion. It is about time to relaunch Mexico-Philippines historical ties. I would start with an approach to get to know each other. Mexicanos and Filipinos, we don't know who we are. where historical heritage represents for both of us. We do not know really in Mexico what is Philippines today. And I would say that in Philippines, they really don't know what Mexico is today. So my proposal is very, very simple, but maybe it can be profitable. Organize people-to-people encounters in both countries. Encounters with architects. No, try to organize a meeting of architects from the Philippines and Mexico. Meetings of artists, meetings of painters, business people, writers, scientists, painters, historians, and so on and so forth. And I have a very practical suggestion. Try to interest universities, both public and private universities in both sides, in Philippines and Mexico, that can take the lead, organizing the students and professors' exchanges. That's a practical way to start. Governments can do many things, but without a people-to-people interest, a people-to-people movement, I think the governments will not go very far. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to hear for your questions and comments. Again, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to all the Philippines Embassy staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for your questions and comments. Yes, Mr. Ignacio Nieto, the floor is yours.
Good evening, señor embajador. I
¿Qué
guess
tal,
good
Ignacio?
morning there in your side. Buenos días, señor embajador. I have a question in this spirit of the suggestions that you are proposing to enhance this connection between Philippines and Mexico, which unfortunately I have to agree is somehow weak, let's say. My question is, I had been trying to find any kind of program or any, to be more specific, any kind of scholarship for the graduate students who are interested in make research studies there in Philippines, perhaps a PhD in a Philippine university. It is a little bit like puzzling for me. It's quite a mystery. I have been unable to find any scholarship for foreign, not for Mexicans, forget Mexicans, but foreign students offered by the Filipino government or by the Filipino institutions. I have inquired in the Ateneo de Manila, of course, in the University of Manila, in Diliman, in this University of Santo Tomas. And that's, I don't know, Señor Embajador, it's kind of contradictory in this idea of reciprocity in the nations. I guess you are more familiar with that. It's international relations. Is this concept in international relations, considering the fact that we have a couple of scholarships for the Filipino students. Maybe we should think about that. That's something we can inquire about it. We can propose it. I think we are already receiving some Filipinos here in Mexico in our universities. I would like to know what about receiving some Mexicans there. That's all.
Let me immediately comment on your very interesting and important comment, Ignacio. My view is that, you should start, as the Chinese say, no? With the first step. My first step would be very simple. Establish, the cátedra, a series of conferences of experts on Mexico in Philippines. Where? In Philippines universities, or appropriate you know, groups that have some interest in Mexico. Make the same in Mexico. Establish the Cátedra of Filipinas. What Filipinas means for Mexican history. Unfortunately, we are very prone to forget the importance of history in both sides, I would say. So we are like cousins. Maybe we are not, brothers and sisters, but we are cousins, certainly, because of our cultural, economic, and historical ties. So if you are able to find one university in the Philippines that says, I will start the cátedra on Mexico studies. I will focus on Mexico. I will ask one of my scholars to focus on Mexican history and Mexico Philippines ties and how to develop after 200 years of really not of disappearance to each other, how we can restart these ties. And I would say, when people to people know each other, when famous architects, writers, historians, and this kind of distinguished Filipinos are recognized and well known in Mexico, they will not be forgotten. And the same for Mexicans in Philippines. When you have that, governments can work on it. Governments can promote a lot of it when you have true interest with a social base. So my proposal is very simple. Universities, you have to make the first step. Start with Mexico cathedrals or Mexico courses in Philippines, and Mexicans, you have to start Filipino studies in Mexican universities, such as el Colegio de México, la Universidad Nacional, la Universidad Metropolitana. There are really dozens of Mexican universities that should focus on the Philippines. That's my comment.
Muchas gracias, señor embajador. Y de nuevo, gracias por sí, la biografía tan fascinante. Tiene mucha razón. Es un personaje, is a character that we almost forget here in Mexico.
Pero es un personaje fantástico, ¿verdad?
Definitely. Definitely fascinating, with an incredible career.
It is a fascinating character.
And that raises the question, why he has been forgotten. We don't even have a
because of the same reasons he was forgotten, because of the same reasons that our Filipino-Mexican history was forgotten, because the galleon ended in 1815. And that's why. And really, it's a historical tragedy. But I mean, this encounter today is precisely focused on how to revive those historical ties.
Thank you very much, Sir Ignacio, for that question. Next up, we have Mr. Kevin Santos. Sir, your question.
Buenos dias, Ambassador. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. How I wish that I could speak a little bit Spanish to you, but unfortunately I haven't improved yet because I only
please continue in your beautiful English.
Because I only use Duolingo in studying Spanish. Anyhow, this my question is, this is more of an alternate history, and I apologize if this is wishful thinking. But what's your analysis if, let's just say, Rodrigo de Vivero's agreements with the Japanese were accepted by the Spanish crown? Is there a chance that there will be an alliance between Spain and Japan that could have helped Spain in its wars against the Dutch in the 17th century in Asia? Or even it might help Japan to conquer the Korean Peninsula after its failures during the Imjin Wars? Or the ruling shogunate will remain forever distrustful of the Europeans? That will be all po. Thank you.
Well, for me, it's a little bit difficult to speculate what would have happened. But let me tell you this. The reason that the Japanese expelled and rejected Spanish and Portuguese and almost, but not all, foreigners influence in Japan, and they decided to isolate themselves for 250 years, was not really economic reasons. That was important, but was not the main reason. The main reason was that the Japanese decided to remain, to put it that way, to remain truthful to their own national culture. And that, an important part of that national culture was being Buddhist, being Shintoist, though, so they were against, the Western religious influences. At the time, the Dutch were not interested in promoting Catholicism or of Christianism in Japan. They were really only in the economic business. They were trading. They were not interested in influencing Japan in any other way. That's why the Japanese decided to keep open to the Dutch, trading business or trading links, and they were an exception, and they isolated themselves. It was, by the way, not the first time that the Japanese decided to isolate themselves. In the 16th and 17th century, the Japanese had decided the same when they decided not to open contacts with China and Korea. Can you imagine in the 6th and 17th century? So, when you are an island countries like Japan or or other countries, you can, especially in previous centuries, you can decide to do that. You can isolate yourself if you want, and so that's why Japan decided to keep their own culture, their own way of life, and not to be influenced by Western powers. They remain open to trade relations with one single European country. They were the Dutch. So they were the ones that really were the winners of this Western competition on influencing Japan. I don't think, maybe, no, had the Spaniards followed the advice of Rodrigo de Vivero, probably they would be, or they would have been in a better position to resist Dutch and English influence in Asia. But in my opinion, at that time, the Spanish Empire was clearly, falling. Their influence, the global influence, were falling, and other powers were ascending, like the British and the Dutch. That's my comment.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We have a next question from Miss Stephanie Claire. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Buenos dias, Embajador Cabañas. My name is Stephanie Claire Soldao, and I'm an international studies student from Far Eastern University in Manila. It is an honor to participate in this colloquium on Philippine-Mexico relations. I truly appreciate your insights on reviving our historical ties, especially through people-to-people exchanges, academic collaborations, and cultural engagements. As a student deeply interested in Latin American studies, particularly Mexico, I am eager to explore ways to contribute to strengthening our bilateral relations. Given the importance of fostering mutual understanding, what specific steps can universities in both countries what specific steps can universities in both countries take to initiate and sustain these exchanges? Additionally, how can young scholars like me actively engage in these initiatives and contribute to meaningfully to this movement? Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let me be very brief with my advice to you. And the current Mexican ambassador to Philippines is a very good friend of mine. He's a very able diplomat, and I know him for many years. So my suggestion is very simple. Try to contact the Mexican embassy in Manila. And I think it would be very useful to explore how to connect in real time, in meetings like this, Mexican and Filipino universities, 3 or 4 from each side. Those universities in Philippines and those universities in Mexico that may have an interest in exploring how to increase cultural historical ties, cultural ties based on the historical ties. And the response may be a surprise. You may find people like you interested in Latin America, not only in Mexico, in Latin America, but also Mexicans interested not only in Philippines, but in Southeast Asia, but with a Filipino perspective. And then you can find that there is one university in Mexico willing to invite a Filipino academic to Mexico to stay for 1 year and make some research in Mexico. And the same for a Mexican scholar doing the same research in Philippines. This is the way to start. I'm saying this and I'm insisting on this because I know, how governments work. Governments are obviously responsible for the diplomatic, politic relationship between among the countries, between the Philippines and Mexico. But when you have and you find out that there is real interest among social actors, such as business people, artists, painters, writers, and universities, then you have a basis to progress. You have a basis to propose things. You have a basis to start these links. So this is my proposal to you. I really recommend to you contact the Mexican embassy in Filipinas. I guess someone from the Mexican embassy is following this meeting.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm not sure, but I think I saw Mr. Rodrigo Lopez raising his hand. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good evening in Mexico and good morning in Manila. Many congratulations to Ambassador Miguel. It was a really, really interesting talk. More than that, very nutritive and very, very, the final was splendid because it's not just the history, because we need to have proposals to build a future together as Mexicans and Philippines. So and to work to make those historical ties work together now in the present and in the future. So many congratulations. Just a few comments about the count of Valle de Orizaba. There's a lot of information about him at the National Archives, Archivo Nacional de la Nación. So for those who would like to write about him, and hopefully I would like to read a small book written by Ambassador Miguel, because his knowledge and passion about this important member of the Mexican history and Philippine history as well, and Spain's history as well. So three nationalities in one man. Could be interesting because not all the information about his past, but with the point of view of the diplomatic career of Ambassador Miguel, it should be a really nice point of view that will guide us to read this biography. So I encourage him to write it, and I'm very happy through Marisa or other vice consul Marisa or some other people from the embassy, if he would like to have a small talk with myself, with yours truly, I will be very happy to share my small knowledge about this personage, this character with Ambassador Ruiz Cabañas. I also would like to add another interesting fact that explorer Sebastián de Vizcaíno was, they say that it was illegitimate son of the King Philip III of Spain. So that's why he had lots of privileges during his life, and he remained in Western Mexico, and many descendants of the Vizcaíno last name in Jalisco and Western Mexico, Colima and Nayarit, are supposed to be descendants from him, from this Sebastián. So there's a lot of history who lives nowadays in these genes. And last but not least, to add another interesting fact about surnames, because Ambassador Ruiz Cabañas has the same surname of a bishop here in Guadalajara, where I'm staying now, in Guadalajara, Jalisco. We had a bishop who came from Navarre, in northern Spain. He was Ruiz de Cabañas, and I know it's a compound surname. So the history of Bishop Cabañas is really interesting, most of all, because the only building which is it has been cataloged in the UNESCO heritage is the Hospicio Cabañas, nowadays a cultural institute made by this bishop, and by coincidence have the same surname as today's speaker, Mr. Ambassador Miguel Ruiz de Cabañas. So Ruiz Cabañas. So thank you very much for the interesting talk. Thank you very much to the embassy, and very happy to see you all here. Bye-bye.
Rodrigo, thank you very much for those very nice comments. And yes, my family is related to the bishop, Juan Cruz Ruiz de Cabañas y Crespo. He brought my family to Mexico. The grandfather of my grandfather was Martin Ruiz de Cabañas. He came to Mexico because he was called by the bishop, and he decided to stay in Mexico because they both of them fall in love with the land, and so really they decided to stay in Mexico 200 years ago, in 1824, after Mexico's independence. They were both, Spanish, but they decided to be Mexicans, and yes, that's my family, and I'm very proud of it. And thank you for mentioning. By the way, Rodrigo, the historian that made public the history of the bishop Ruiz de Cabañas was a famous Mexican historian, José López Portillo y Weber. As you know, he was from Guadalajara. He was the father of a former Mexican president. Nice to meet you, Rodrigo.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'd like to give the floor now to Ambassador Lilibeth de Opera, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for your question about scholarly work. The Philippine Embassy recently met or received some professors from the De La Salle University, they really want to establish a foothold for more studies or exchanges between De La Salle University in the Philippines and De La Salle University in Mexico. Also, our consul from Monterrey, Consul Cue, knows that there are also agreements and tratados or agreements between some universities in the Philippines and universities in Monterrey. So we have already started work on this. Last 2023, we had the establishment of the Philippine Studies Program at UNAM. So that is also one area that is open to scholars and students of Philippine-Mexico relations. And we are hoping, in the Philippines, we have PACLAS, which is an association of colleges that handles Latin American studies. And they are very much actively involved in trying to promote the learning of Spanish in the Philippines. Because as Ambassador Miguel has said, the arrival of the Americans really wiped out our the facility to speak the language in the Philippines.
Exactly.
Yeah. And and we are really hoping that more scholars will take the language, learn the language, because there are a lot of materials in your archives that are still to be read and to be studied and analyzed, and so that more people will know about our past. I saw that we slowly are learning that more and more scholars, like in the chat, Mr. Bayona, Professor or Dr. Bayona from the Colegio de Mexico, has been actively involved in promoting the studies on on Southeast Asia, specifically also with the Philippines. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much po, Ambassador De Pera. Do we have any more questions for our resource speaker? Mr. Renz, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening to our friends there in Mexico, or in this case, maybe our cousins, as discussed by Ambassador, and from our kababayans here in the Philippines. Magandang umaga po. Ambassador, my question is about the divide in Japan. If I remember correctly, you said that the Japanese population were divided in accepting Christianity. Some were accepting of Christian forces, while others were, let's say, not accepting of it. I noted from your presentation that the feudal lord from Sendai named Date Masamune sent Hasekura Tsunenaga to New Spain to talk with the viceroy and asking to send Franciscan monks to Japan. To me, it was so interesting why these groups of people in Japan would be so accepting of Christianity. I'd like to ask if you know any reason why they do so. Are they getting benefits from New Spain? That's why they are accepting, or is there anything else that you can provide in this matter? Thank you.
Thank you, Renz. Thank you very much for your question. I really don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate why. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir,
Hello?
clearly. Thank you.
Okay. Why? But it seems to me when you have a feudal lord in northern Japan sending a special envoy like Hasekura Tsunenaga to New Spain, and to visit the Pope in Rome to ask for the sending of more Franciscan monks, to spreading Christianism, Catholicism in Japan, Well, there was some sympathy towards Christianism, Catholicism in Japan. But at the same time, there were very powerful forces in Japan that were opposed to that trend. And they said, no, Japan has to be, to put it in a way, loyal to its Buddhist and Shintoist tradition. And the problem is that these Westerns are promoting a religion that cannot, that cannot coexist with other religions. The Christians, at that time, 500 years ago, were adamant in insisting that the only true religion was Catholicism. Maybe that was something unacceptable to the Japanese. The Japanese were willing to accept, yes, we can combine Buddhism and Shintoism, why not? But when you have a new religion that says, no, all other religions have to be abolished, and the only true religion is Catholicism, maybe that was the reason that an important, part or sectors of Japanese society that decided to say, no, we are, loyal to our religious traditions. We don't want to change that to adopt a new religion, which is not or was not born in Japan. I don't know, but there was some. There is an additional political strategic factor. Some people in Japan said, well, these Western powers, they start with religious uh, promotion. They start with the monks promoting Catholicism. But after that, you have the warriors. You will have the warriors invading Japan and trying to conquer Japan. That was at the time a real, fear that the Japanese, or at least some sectors in Japan, felt that was a real danger. So they didn't want to take the risk and say, yes, we accept that. And, being an island country, and that's really a key element to understand Japan, that they were a group of islands, they decided to isolate themselves. And you cannot blame them because for 250 years, they were very successful in isolating themselves from the outside world. And they decided what kind of influences or external influences could enter Japan and what kind of influences should not be allowed to enter Japan. And I think that is something that really defines Japanese society until today.
Ambassador, thank you so much for answering my question. Mabuhay po kayo.
Thank you, Renz.
Thank you very much, Sir Renz and Ambassador, for answering his questions. Okay, so I guess at this point, we will be closing the floor for questions and comments. Thank you very much, sir, for answering our participants' questions. And please indulge us from the Philippine Embassy. We would like to request all the participants to please turn on their cameras so that we can have a group photo.
Lamentablemente.
I'm sorry to not.
It's
I'm
okay,
sorry.
sir. You'll remain
I'm sorry,
the
Madam
mysterious
Ambassador
resource
Lilibet, I'm
person.
sorry.
Maybe Ambassador Miguel, you can send us afterwards a picture.
I will
And then-
immediately send it to you.
Because we
I
publish.
will send it to Marisa.
We publish our reports, and we would like your picture to be there. We
I'm
upload
sorry.
it in the FB.
I'm really sorry for this
No, está bien.
inconvenience.
Está bien, señor.
Okay, is everybody ready? In 3,
Ready.
2, 1, smile. Okay, for the next slide, 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for
Only 2?
indulging us in that request.
Yeah.
At
We-
this point, we would like to call on, yes, Ambassador.
Ambassador, part of the program is we request feedback from the participants, and we will surely forward to you the comments of the participants who attended tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Lilibet. It has been a great pleasure to share this session with you and your staff and your followers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. At this point, we would like to call on Ms. Marissa Winkler, Third Secretary and Vice Consul of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, for the closing remarks. Ma'am?
Thank you, NJ. On behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Mexico, first, I would like to thank Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas for his very interesting and informative presentation, another episode that we learned a lot. And of course, to Dr. Tomas Calvillo and to our participants. To our participants, please stay tuned because as you can see, our virtual colloquium series is not only talking about Philippines and Mexico, as in Philippines and Mexico, it's the connections of these relations to other countries also. As you can see, the Philippine-Mexico relations is somehow a key important to the Mexico and Japan relations. And in this episode, we learned that Governor Rodrigo de Vivero was a very important personality in our history. He helped promote peace with Japan during that time. So please continue to follow us. And next episode, it is our Filipino Food Month. We invited a Filipino chef. So it will be on April 25. Please join us in our episode next month. It will be very interesting because it's about the Philippine Mexico cuisines. And thank you once again. Happy weekend. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And please don't forget to answer our feedback form so that because it is a requirement to get a certificate. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marisa.